Okay, deciduous forests are basically plants, or the trees that are in deciduous forests are trees that shed all their leaves every year. There is heavy rain, but dry seasons in the deciduous forest, and they're typically cold, but not as cold as coniferous forests. There's temperate and tropical, and they're almost the same, just in different regions. And just like the coniferous forests, the deciduous forests go through all four seasons.
Temperate would generally be the word that describes the cooler of the two, and tropical would be the warm. Okay, when you see those words, try to reference that. Okay, you just covered it.
Yeah. The soil is typically rich. It's when the leaves shed, or when the trees shed their leaves, the leaves decompose in the soil, creating a more nutrient-rich soil. And most of the floor is covered in leaf litter. So those are two pictures. The trees are typically hardwood like oak and maple, and they have and hickory, and they have broad leaves like those that are up there, and they change colors depending on the season, and they conserve food in their trunk. The animals are migratory, and they leave food in, just like the trees conserve their own energy in the trunk. Of animals like squirrels and stuff put their nuts and stuff in there too. There are a few predators. There are a few predators left due to hunting and urbanization, and that's degrading the forest, obviously. The biggest environmental problem is, again, deforestation, and that's, again, for logging and stuff like that. But they cut down the trees, and fragmentation, like logging in the top right picture, and fragmentation's the other. And the solution is reforestation. Okay. Rainforest is the third type of forest, but it's the rainforest takes up the smallest area of land of all the biomes, but it contains the most biodiversity. It's located in Central America and some parts of Africa, and in some parts of India too.
That's going to be important. Mapping forest. Okay, and I don't know how many of you haven't noticed or have noticed, but I posted on Canvas the maps review and the ACTS review. Those are two things that we haven't covered that are going to be on Canvas that you need to know for the AP exam. Okay.
There's many different types of plants in the rainforest, and there's 4 different layers. And the sun does not, it's important to note that the sun does not penetrate through all 4 layers. The emergent layer is the top layer, I think.
You think there's another picture?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Pretty.
The emergent layer is the top of the trees, and most trees can grow really tall, like 180 to 200 feet. This is obviously the zone with the most sunlight, and it has the most birds that live here. Then there's the canopy, which is where they have the most species diversity, and there's the most food, which is kind of like amongst the trees, not all the way at the top. Then there's the understory, which are where nocturnal animals live, because the sun does not go all the way down, all the way through. And there's a lot of species there too, a lot of species diversity. And lastly, there's the forest floor, which is extremely dark, and there's few plants, mostly just moss and ferns. The floor, like I said, is dark, and it's moist, so they have fast decomposition, so there's better, richer soil. The soil is nutrient poor, but the species are nutrient rich.
Good. So because of the rapid decomposition, the soil's nutrients get sucked up really fast by plants, so the soil is actually very poor, and that's why you see the vibrant colors throughout the forest, because the species are nutrient rich. That's the thought process there.
And the biggest environmental problem, is the degradation of the rainforest, and that's for, again, their deforestation. and most of it is for subsistence farming and agriculture, but it's also for logging too.
Yeah, that's probably a good question. So farming is our key reason for deforestation of rainforest because they eliminate the rainforest to use it as farmland and then logging, and that's it.
So our presentation is focused on water pollution. The first slide here, we're talking about water resources. And obviously, Earth is composed of a certain percentage of fresh water and a certain percentage of salt water. So can someone tell us that?
97. No, 70.
No, it's
25. Tell us all three.
Tell us, yeah, all three. Like what?
70% water.
It's 71. Earth is composed of 71% water, and 3% of that is fresh water, which makes the other percentage salt water. And then 0.03% of that fresh water is available to us. This next slide is basically just a breakdown of what we said in the last one, and it shows through each step like what the distribution of water is. So we just said that 97% is salt, 3% is fresh, and of that fresh water, about 69% comes from ice caps and glaciers, and about 30% comes from groundwater, and so on and so forth. So where is my water? Lakes. This particular water comes from lakes, rivers, and streams. Can anyone tell me what that water is referred to as? Okay, yeah, it's surface water, but it is accessible. And the next part, it's also known as reliable runoff because it results from precipitation and snowmelt. It's known as watershed, and we're going to get to the definition of watershed in 2 slides. Okay, so where's my water continued? Groundwater and aquifers. There's the zone of saturation and water table, natural recharge and lateral recharge, which results from infiltration and percolation. And we're going to get into the detail of what natural recharge is and lateral recharge and the difference between the two. So watershed, as seen in the picture here, is land from which surface water drains into lakes and rivers. And we said what the next term is from. It's what kind of runoff? Reliable runoff, exactly. So it's basically, as the picture shows, what is watershed? It's like a making of a river, and it shows like the flow, how watershed is formed. Okay, aquifers. So as we said, it's the zone of blank is below ground where water is plentiful. Saturation. And that makes sense. It's obviously if something's saturated, there's going to be a lot of water. Which type of recharge is where it comes from precipitation, infiltration, and percolation? Is that natural or is that lateral recharge? Which one? It's natural. Very good. Which makes sense because it's like the natural cycle if you think of it that way. Like it rains, it precipitates, and it infiltrates the ground and percolates through the rocks. So that leaves the second one being lateral recharge, which is when it comes from nearby rivers and streams. And the last one, the top of the zone of saturation is known as the water table. Very good. And that's a picture. So this next slide is talking about global water use. Can someone tell me what 70% of the global water use comes from? There's like a pie chart in the bottom to kind of help you.
It's like whole,
Well, agricultural is actually 70%. That's the most where the global water use is from, which makes sense if you think of like crops and plants and that kind of thing. 22% comes from where? Someone said industrial, exactly. And then residential and municipal, as you can figure out from the math, it would be 8%. Will be left over. And residential is just means like obviously in the homes and that kind of thing.
Great picture.
Okay, so now we're going to go into detail about each of these, the industrial, agricultural, and home use. So can anyone tell me what this picture is kind of showing here? Obviously it's sprinklers, but
It gets lost in the inner.
yeah, the water got
yeah. So that's called irrigation when water evaporates before it hits the ground. Very good.
Well, irrigation is the system
That is used.
to water crops, but the problem with them is that they tend to lose water before the water hits the ground.
The industrial use, the word you can probably uncover it. It's manufacturing goods. So obviously, when you think industrial, manufacturing, the making of goods, they dispose of waste, and that's why there's cleaning next to it. It's also used to generate power, and it also is used for cooling systems and hydroelectric power as well. Okay, so residential, as we said before, is like water usage in the home. So can someone tell me what you have, like the one that's uncovered there? You have outdoor, toilet is the next one. Bath water, shower, laundry, faucet. And the pie chart's just showing how it's distributed in the home and what's the most and least.
So the number one use of water in your home is what?
Toilets.
It's outdoor.
It's outdoor.
It's irrigating or washing your cars. You use a lot more water. Inside would be the toilet. And I'm curious of how much this chart has changed with our new sustainable toilets.
Yeah, we're gonna get to the whole waterless toilet.
Yeah,
1 gallon.
That's actually.
no. Oh, because they had the half flush, full flush thing.
Oh, yeah?
Miss Arango.
Yeah, depending on what you need to flush for. Alright, they're gonna
Miss
talk about
Arango,
that.
the pie chart is the updated one.
Oh, yeah?
Like the
Because it looks exactly like mine. Okay.
1.6 gallons.
It's like.
Okay, so now that we gave you guys like a general introduction of like water and as a whole, we're going to start talking about the problems associated with water. So besides overconsumption, urbanization, increasing temperature and floods, can someone give us a couple? I know there's not a picture to kind of help you out, but does anyone tell me?
Uneven distribution.
Yeah, so uneven distribution is one. It's on the bottom one, yeah. Another one of the top one in the very top corner is overpopulation. And we always associate overpopulation, overconsumption as like the major problems in any environmental situation. Some other ones, you have drought, unsustainable use is a huge one, and obviously pollution, which is the introduction of harmful chemicals that winds up degrading the water. And we're going to talk about the different types of pollution in a minute. So those are kind of just the general problems that are associated with water, and now we're going to break them down to talk about it more. So overconsumption is the first one we're going to talk about, and the definition of overconsumption is what? It's a situation where resource use has, like what happened to it? It's outpaced the sustainable capacity of the ecosystem, exactly. So we're using it before it has time to even replenish, and we're using it at a very fast rate. So reliable surface runoff is the amount of surface runoff that we can count on, and globally right now we use approximately 34% of this. But the sad news is, by 2025, we would have used 70 to 90% of that globally. And so it's pretty scary. In a matter of 11 years, that it would go up that much. Yeah. This next part is talking about uneven distribution. And this is kind of just saying that nation versus nation, state versus state, city versus city, and farmer versus city dweller, there's an uneven distribution of water. And that chart, the little graph that we have there of the United States, is just showing that the water withdrawal rate by state in million of gallons per day. So as you can see, Texas, which is shaded in a darker color, has a higher withdrawal rate than a state like Maine, for example. So it's kind of just showing the uneven distribution.
To the point where they have to buy water from another state.
Exactly. This next part, drought. The definition of drought itself is a prolonged period of what? It's low precipitation and high. Exactly. And the bad thing about droughts, obviously, is it leads to dry soil. Yeah. And then there's a reduced flow of water. And because of this reduced water and dry soil, because it's not fertile, there's a decrease of trees and crops that can't be used. It's not fertile. And probably the biggest problem with droughts is the last one, that it can cause a shift in biomes. As the group that went before was talking about, how a grassland can shift to a desert because of like things like this, and if it is reversible, it will take years and years and years. So a shift in biomes is a huge thing associated with droughts. And that picture there is just showing how it's accounted for. Water pollution problems is what we're going to talk about next. So what exactly is the definition of water pollution? I kind of touched upon it before, but it's the introduction of harmful chemical, physical, or biological agents that wind up degrading the water supply. Okay, so sources of water pollution. There are two sources. Can someone tell me, what is a pollution from a single source? Is that, yeah, it's point pollution. And examples of point pollution would be like leaking, industrial, mining, that kind of thing. And then pollution from many sources, and it's often untraceable, is obviously exactly. And the leading source or leading example of non